Today we're talking about breaking silos and working cross-functionally in analytics, which is actually a huge topic. You know, we learn about so much of the technical stuff in university, and then we get to work and we realize that it is so much about people. So Eric is our guest today. We're going to be talking about working across product, sales, and developer teams, which is crucial for being able to actually deliver these projects. The challenges that we see in manufacturing, utilities, and finance, and a lot of the common themes as well. And, you know, how to really be able to improve your ability to work with these teams to set yourself up for success as an analytics professional. I'll hop right in because you have so many exciting stories to share. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you've got into analytics and a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So I have done a lot of different things. One thing that comes to mind is I had a job interview a long time ago where the guy asked me as he looked over my resume, he said, "Do you know what you want to be when you grow up?" My answer was no. I'm not even sold on the whole growing up thing yet. So I have worked in academia, in manufacturing. I've been a restaurant health inspector, and then most recently then moved towards sales and marketing, and then marketing analytics and some sales analytics, and data science work. And so it's been over a long period of time, over several years, doing lots of different things. But I like to say that in all those different things, either I found data or data has found me. And then a few years ago, I realized, I didn't realize, somebody told me, because I was having an informal job interview and just banging on about data this and data that for my job. And the guy said, data is a thing. You can just do that as your job instead of filling in the corners of your job with data. And that was a light bulb moment for me, changed the trajectory of my career completely. And so that's when I started focusing on, okay, well, I want to get a data analyst job then and actually work in analytics, and kind of made that shift over the past few years.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things I love the most about what you shared is that your story isn't necessarily linear, and mine isn't either. And I think for, people who are maybe making a career transition, or they decided that they wanted to do this later, when we look on LinkedIn, we see these perfect rosters. And even if you look at mine and the way I share, it often looks, like I've just had this very clean career. And the reality is I finished my bachelor's degree in 2004, and you don't see anything about data from me until 2010. And so I think the message there too is that, whatever your career trajectory looks like, know that other people are finding themselves, they're moving around, they're trying different things, and that, you can be really successful in data and get there. And that, it doesn't always, the reality isn't always the way that it looks on social media.
Oh yeah. I did my undergrad in biology, and then I did a master's degree in language teaching. I've never been a language teacher. I knew I wouldn't be. And I've never worked in a lab, but it did help me get a job. My biology degree did help me get a job with a scientific company doing marketing and sales work. And I got to do some fun data work while I was there and stuff like that. So I definitely think that having a diverse or accidental or fumbling around background, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it feels like right now, is totally fine. It's not necessarily a liability as long as you're looking for opportunities to grow. You'll find things that you want to do. Also, to your point about if you look at people's LinkedIn and it looks like they've got it all together, that's because when I'm writing things in LinkedIn, I'm going to grab the bullet points from my job that make sense to the trajectory that I'm on right now. So if you would have looked at my LinkedIn profile 7 years ago, the same jobs with different bullet points would have looked like I was headed in a totally different direction. So there's always more than meets the eye.
Yep. It's the story that I want to tell in the moment.
Yeah.
So to dive right in, because this is actually such a huge topic, I think we all go to school and study. I mean, we just talked about how people have different paths. So I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of us study and we learn that, presenting is super technical. We're doing the, methodology, the results, and we're talking about the technical aspect, and then we start a job and it's really about being able to get buy-in, influence, and work effectively across many teams that are non-technical. So we're sometimes working with sales, product, marketing, and of course the dev teams. But can you share, some of what gets tricky there and some of the challenges that you've experienced when trying to do this thing that is really central to the job?
Yeah. So the most challenging thing, I think, is that when you start working on a project, like when I have started working on a project, or when my boss says, hey, there's this thing, maybe go look into it and see if it's doing what we think it's doing, which is a great way to like be thrown into the deep end. But all the people that you are now going to talk to, product team, other analysts, whoever, they have experience, they have the curse of knowledge, and they don't know what you don't know. And so they'll throw out acronyms, or they talk about like business patterns, like, oh, well, yeah, we see that our cost per lead acquisition, it dropped to $2. And so that's a good thing. And I'm like, what is a good cost per lead? Is $2 good? Is $2 really expensive? I don't have context. And so coming into it without context, walking into another team where you don't have context and you may or may not know the keywords, means you have to ask so many questions. And I remember when I started my first like full-time analyst job, day one, I said, all right, I am going to be the guy that asks the dumb questions, because otherwise I'm not going to get the answers that I need. And I'm glad I did, because so many times in meetings, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I don't know what that acronym means. What is AVI or whatever, and without fail, somebody would message me like in the Slack on the side or whatever and say, hey, I was wondering the same thing. Thanks for asking. Like every time people would have the exact same question because of the curse of knowledge. And so that's huge. Also, because sometimes you might be working with an analyst, but then you're also working with somebody who's a dev team person who they don't know what SQL is. They don't use SQL. They use other languages. And so it's like, just like how, it's annoying when your neighbor or your mom assumes that because you work on a computer, you must be an IT person.
Yeah.
Same thing with like the dev team, where they're like, I'm not a data person. I work on a computer, but I don't do SQL. So anyway, just like the context and keywords and being willing to ask a ridiculous number of questions. Oh, fun story about that. In that job, we had an acronym, CPL, cost per lead. And in marketing, CPL meant one thing, cost per lead. And in sales, CPL also meant cost per lead, but they were different numbers. They meant totally different things, but they called the exact same thing. Even on calls together, they would refer to the same acronym, meaning the same words, but different actual like buckets of money. And so, yeah, like don't ever be afraid to ask questions, because sometimes you'll find that the people are like, oh, I didn't even realize we were talking about that.
Yeah, no, you brought up some good points. And, before I started in analytics, I didn't realize how many analysis ideas were actually just going to be lobbed over the fence. Like it's your boss coming in Slack being like, hey, we've gotten some bad feedback on this. We might need to think about doing something around sentiment analysis and tracking this or whatever. And, you just assume that things are going to be formally defined. And really, we're the ones who have to, it's an idea. And then we need to push to be able to scope and refine this and get it in a language in a way that we're going to be able to actually act on it. Because often the people that are requesting these things are not, they're not coming to you with, they're going to say they want a model, but that's very ambiguous, right? And Also, too, great point on things being defined. I've actually done, when I was working on an analytics team of 65 people, there were times where I found that I was actually working on a similar analysis to somebody in a different team who had a different definition for one of the metrics. And then we'd spend like 2 weeks trying to figure out why our numbers didn't foot. And really, it was just some silly filter that they used that my team wasn't using. And it's probably like the least efficient use of time. But, to set you all up, this is something that you might see in the future. Like, it's very, very real. And I think it happens everywhere. And I'm glad we can like bond over these common.
Yeah. One more piece of that is prioritization as well. Like there's definitions and stuff, but like when somebody lobs an idea over the wall to me, I'm going to lob it right back and say, do you need this? Like, when do you need this? Also, like, product manager comes and is like, hey, can we do this? And I say, yes, we can, but you also want me to do these other 3 things. So just tell me what order you want them in. I'll get them all to you. But like I need to know what order you need them. And also I want you to know these are other things that I'm working on, because they need to know where their request fits in. Because, I have one guy in particular that I work with right now. He is so helpful to work with, because when I ask him when he needs something, he just gives me a date. He'll be like, can we get that by the end of next week? Now, this one, we don't need that for like a month. So like, it's so helpful, because then I know I don't need to drop everything and do something for him right now. But I also know I'm not going to forget about it. And he knows that too. So prioritization, along with all the definitions and making sure we have the ideas fleshed out.
I love that. And actually, I do. What?
I just want to say, I saw a couple of people, I think Katya and Christiana, in the chat saying like it's being afraid of asking because you're a junior data analyst. That's like the people who are expected to be asking. Why would you know? You've never done it before, And so like, that's exactly like when you're supposed to be asking the most questions, like, what the heck is this? What does this mean? Just the definition questions. It's totally fine. Also, I can relate to being afraid to asking too much. I always feel nervous before asking that dumb question, because I'm like, somebody's going to judge me and think that I should already know this. But I have found through my experience that it's the exact opposite. It really is. People
right. But at the same time, like, asking those questions is what allows you to set boundaries, because if you don't have the information, you're not able to, you don't have the full picture, right? And then it comes back on you, because when you were saying that you push back for prioritization, I have been places where I've pushed back on prioritization and the response has been, well, I want you to multitask. Right? Which isn't a real thing, because if I'm working on 2 projects, I'm either going to deliver them both at a later date, or if you decide which one is more important, I can deliver that first and then deliver the second one. But, without asking all the questions, without having conversations that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable, it's difficult for you to set yourself up for success, because no one is going to set boundaries for you, right? Everyone's going to assume that you're fine and that you're going to deliver these things unless they hear from you.
Yeah. And, if you end up with somebody who's being unreasonable, like, I just think you just need to multitask, then that's what good managers are for, to like, I'm grateful for my manager. Yeah, unless it's coming from your manager, in which case that's what bad managers are doing, right? Mm-hmm. But, I think being able to find where you can have that kind of a conversation, or have somebody who can understand it for you. And sometimes it's just like, all right, I'm just going to try and get as much done as I can. And if it doesn't get done and the ship doesn't sink at that exact time, then my experience has been that the show goes on.
Yeah. Right. So I would love to pivot a little bit and talk about some of the interesting projects that you've worked on, because I've also worked in the utilities. So I do really enjoy hearing about your real life experience. So can you tell me about one of the projects that you've worked on in the utilities and what impact it had?
Yeah. So last month, we just launched a program called, or new customer tool called disaggregation. And disaggregation basically means off the meter on your house, there comes a big number, right? Maybe it's 1,000 kWh for the month or whatever. So you've used this much electricity. And so we are using models to disaggregate that, to break it down into the pieces, to say, okay, well, how much of that do we think came from your air conditioner? How much of it came from your kitchen, et cetera? And breaking that down. And so the impact that it's had so far, it's very new, but so far we've had a lot of really positive customer feedback, surveys, and just our quick surveys in their online account management platform. And people are very positive and enjoying being able to see that. And the other thing that we're building on top of that is we really want to be able to keep an eye on usage for people, because then we can potentially give them notifications to let them know, like, hey, so like your air conditioning might have problems. Like, your usage keeps going up. Other people like you, their usage isn't going up. The weather, all else being equal, your air conditioner looks like it's having some problems. So don't call us angry because your power bill went up. Instead, let us reach out to you and say, hey, I think your air conditioner might be on the fritz. Let's get that thing fixed before you get a really big, nasty bill and you come, frustrated with us or something. So I love that. Another thing I'm working on or have been doing some work on is predicting solar power generation from homes. Because some homes, they will sync their solar inverter with us. And so we know exactly how much solar power they're generating, but many do not. And so if we can predict that, we can use that to do cool things with battery storage and helping meet peak demand using renewable energy rather than dirty like peaker plants and things like that. And so I think that's really exciting and really interesting because, one, I think solar and renewables are cool, and two, I like being able to see, like, we could turn that into an impact every afternoon at 5 p.m. By putting renewable energy into the grid instead of relying on more consumptive sources of energy.
What I loved about the first project is what I believe I'm hearing, right? If you have that example where the air conditioner goes on the fritz, right? And you let somebody know, you're actually not saving the company any money. The company could have made more money if you used more electricity, but you're choosing to be like the good Samaritan and let somebody know, and it has positive implications for the environment and stuff like that. And I just often feel like in business, that isn't necessarily where we often choose to focus the majority, more of our energy is on like being a good Samaritan. And I mean, it should be, but it just feels like it's not. Do you feel like, I also heard you talking about renewables. Like, is that a big discussion that you guys are having internally? And like, do you feel like you're in an environment where like it's really customer first?
Yeah. So one thing that I've enjoyed learning about in working with an electricity company is that like sometimes using less electricity is good for the customer and it's good for the company. It doesn't, right. Because the reason being, being in an unregulated or deregulated environment or whatever. So we have all these different competing power companies, and it's really complicated system that I don't understand so much of it. But like, there are certain times of day, certain times of year, for example, when the customer maybe is paying this like flat rate. I'm paying 18 cents per kilowatt hour, whatever it is. They're paying their flat rate, but sometimes their electricity usage is extremely expensive for the company, like 10, 20, 100 times more expensive than what they're paying. It's these ridiculous amounts because they're using it during these peak times. And so if we can encourage them or find a way to use renewables, then they're going to be saving some money. And we as the company are also going to be saving money because they're not paying this much and we're not paying this much. And so we all win when we use things more, when we put this technology to work for us and use it more intelligently, strategically, when we use those things strategically. So I like that it's a win-win. I love a good win.
Yeah. Do you guys not have demand-based pricing? So like,
So there are like a zillion different types of plans. There are different types of plans. I know in the past, like this far predates me, there was a company in Texas, not the one I work for, but another company that they allowed you to pay, I think, like the wholesale rate for power, which is great when power's cheap. But on an August afternoon when everybody is coming home and plugging in their EVs and turn on their AC, you could get a power bill for thousands of dollars. And I don't know how somebody didn't think that was going to be a terrible idea, but somehow it ended up making it to the market and has become, I think, an infamous story since.
Wow. No, that's awesome. And then you have even more to share, right? Can you talk a little bit about one of your projects in finance?
Yeah, for sure. So I used to work for LendingTree. And LendingTree is a company that if you want to I worked in business loans. So let's say you're a small business owner and you want to get a loan to buy a new piece of equipment because that piece of equipment will allow you to work much more efficiently. And so you'll be able to pay it back. I love that. Okay, cool. So you want to get a loan, but you don't want to go fill out the same form 10 different times. So you go to LendingTree, you fill out a form, provide some information, and then you are matched with some lenders who would be a good fit for your equipment purchase need. Great. But we had two different experiences. We had the called the default experience and the white glove experience. And the white glove experience, because we were keeping our hands on that person, was very expensive. But it could also return it would also get the most return if that loan ended up being funded versus somebody just goes through and boom, you see your list of here are 5 people that want to talk with you and then we're done. And so then you go off and you talk to those 5 people and, we'll get paid a smaller amount versus working with you through the whole process. And so within my first 3 weeks on the job or so, my manager said, we have this system that was built a few years ago that's supposed to route people smart route between one experience or the other experience. But we don't know if it's working. We don't actually use it. We built it. We don't know if it's working. But it'd be cool if it was. And I said, okay, cool. I'm gonna go take a look at that. And so that was the great experience to start me off because I got to talk with the product team, talk with a couple different development teams, and start figuring out where had wires gotten crossed because this system was not working. One thing I will put in here is I was doing an analysis of its performance. It was running in the background, but we just weren't using it. I was doing an analysis and I did not validate the data properly. And I came to a totally incorrect conclusion. And talked about it with my boss and with my vertical manager and everything like that. And then realized that I had not validated the data properly. Always validate the data. Always validate the data. Always validate. So anyway, that was a painful lesson learned. Validated it, figured out that it wasn't working, and then worked with these different development teams to realize that they were doing things that I didn't know how to do, as far as their, coding and stuff goes. And we found though that they had a code, basically the name of a field. Let's just say it was customer_value. And the other team had a code name for that same field that was just customer value, but written in camel case instead of with an underscore in the middle. And so the data would flow through from one side of the pipe and just fall on the floor. And this pipe would sit here with no data flowing into it. All we had to do, change a couple variable names so that things lined up. And then now we were getting the correct estimations of customer lead or customer value and all of that. And so now suddenly we had this tool, but somebody had to take the time to figure out what the heck was going on. And how to fix it. And then from there, now we knew it worked. Then it became a lot of working with the teams to figure out, okay, like we know this thing works on the desktop. Now, how do we make sure that it works in production? Which was a ton of fun, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the highlights for me also was visualizing the impact of going from our current system to the new one, because we had this historical data. So we could see, hey, we had, let's say 1,000 people come through and they went down these different routes and they ended up making us this much money. And we could plot each of them on a chart. And then we could say, based on this new system, if we had been using it, we would have, here's how the distribution would have looked instead. And we could see that, there were some customers that, a lot of customers went where they needed to go. But for those like 10% that really needed to be shifted, we were sacrificing like 10 times as much revenue. And so being able to visualize that and sit that in front of my manager, my vertical manager, the sales, whatever you call the CEO of sales for the company, like being able to like show that was so powerful, much more powerful than being able to pull up a spreadsheet or show a diagram or like a flow chart of like anything. It was just like, here is the chart. If you're on this side of the line, you're really valuable. If you're on this side of the line, you weren't so valuable. We need to just switch those. The end. And it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, charts that tell a money story are the best. You feel so good
Yeah.
when it's like right there for you. Awesome. And so with these experiences working in the utilities, finance, I know you've also been in manufacturing, sort of what things do you feel are common across industries? What's sort of different? If somebody's thinking about what industry they may want to work for, is there anything that, any sort of tips you can give them on what they might want to think about?
The things that are common, everybody's in a hurry. No matter what industry you're in, everybody's in a hurry. And so that's why, going back to what we talked about earlier, that's why it's so important to clarify as early as you can, when do you need this? And if possible, which is usually possible, let's pull up a whiteboard screen or an Excel sheet or something, and let's doodle what you think this final result should look like. And that has saved me a lot of time. Like I've made a little Excel thing. I've said like, here's version 1, and another Excel thing. Here's version 2. Which of these is the thing you're asking for? And they say, I want version 2. Perfect. Okay. And so then I can just roll forward with it. So like communicating, doodling, prioritizing, all really important. As far as like industry specific stuff, I personally haven't found like that I've needed to have a lot of industry specific knowledge. It's been really helpful. It was really helpful for me to have some marketing knowledge because when I was doing marketing analytics, but I didn't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs of lending when I worked for LendingTree. I don't need to know all the ins and outs of electricity. It definitely helps as I learn some of those ins and outs. But the most important thing is to know how to ask good questions, know what questions to ask, and just being communicative. And also increasingly knowing how to effectively use tools like LLMs to be more efficient in my work.
Mm-hmm. No, I really feel that. When I was in the utilities, I was in supporting supply chain, and then I had like 3 jobs in a row where I was supporting marketing. And by the time you get to the 3rd job, you can spot the low-hanging fruit. And like you mentioned earlier about terms, when you show up and you don't have context, anytime you start a new job, right, you're still not going to understand what the benchmarks are. You're not,
Right.
You look at a number and you're like, conversion, do I think I can increase that 1% with this if we test this thing? No idea. I have no context, right? And so like you need some longer term tenure to be able to get to that place where you can start to feel those things.
I still sanity check numbers all the time.
Yeah, right. But so there's in certain ways, it's like you can bring your knowledge with you, and staying within marketing analytics, you can be a rock star setting your next job. Um, but another thing you said, with everyone being in a hurry, that is also something that I have experienced as well. And I've also thought over time that analytics doesn't really lend itself well to like working part-time, because if somebody wants a model or they want an analysis, they do not want to hear that you're working on it 3 days a week. They like really want someone to be available to do that. And that's just something I've personally struggled with. So I don't know. Don't know if you've ever tried to work part-time. Okay. What skills or approaches do you think are the most critical for analysts who are now, they're going into these cross-functional roles and maybe don't have experience working cross-functionally? Like, what do you think are the top things they need to think about?
Yeah. So a big one would be like thinking through, it's kind of look before you leap, right? Where we're just saying, if we know, if the person we're talking to has a good idea of what they want, then talking through it can get us to making sure that I'm delivering the thing that that stakeholder wants. Case in point, a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a product guy, and he's telling me this like complex process to follow to get to this answer that he wants. And in my mind, the output would have been very different. But as we talk through it, he's like, at the end of this, all I want is two numbers. I need the number for the customer. I need the number for the company. I don't need it daily. I don't need it monthly. I don't need it by customer. I just do the whole thing rolled up for the last year, two numbers. And so that was really helpful, because a lot of times we talk through lots of the pieces. Like we talk through lots of different pieces of the puzzle, but we don't actually talk about like the puzzle, like the whole thing that we're trying to have as the end result. And so I'm getting better at doing that. I found I'm better at doing it when I'm asking, like when someone's asking me to do work for them, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to ask you questions because I want to make sure I know what you want, and then I don't get off this call and don't know what I need to do. Where I struggle with it is in my own work for myself, when I'm just like working up here in the gray, and it's like, oh yeah, I know what I need to do. Boom. And I just like jump in, and it can kind of go off half cocked sometimes. And so when I get out, sometimes it's just like I have a text file that's just called to-do list. And if I just get out my little notepad file and I'm like, I need to do this, and then I need to do this, and then what do I need to do? Or like, what do I expect the output of that to even look like? I guess I don't really know. Do we even have that data? You know, that like, if I think through those things mindfully before just jumping in like a goofball and just like rolling as fast as I can and then smashing into a wall, I can save myself some hassle and have a better picture of what it is before I get started. It also makes things easier because I can like, sometimes I'll open up like a cell. I use Databricks. So I'll open up a cell in Databricks Notebook, and I'll just make a comment like, do this, then a comment, do this, and then do this, and then do this. And then I just have to like fill in the blanks essentially, which is really nice. So that I think is a really important skill that is, for me, a discipline it's challenging. It's challenging to cultivate, like asking myself the questions before I get started, because sometimes it's just exciting to get started.
No, and asking the questions up front, right, before you go into a meeting, because I want to know what somebody is thinking about. There have been times where it's like, oh, we want to talk to you about a potential project. I'm going to throw some time on your calendar. And then you walk in there and they start asking you questions, and you're like, I haven't thoughtfully thought this through yet. I don't know what, the scope of this is going to look like. If somebody gives me some context ahead of time, I might hop into SQL and see like, what does this data actually look like? What are some of the barriers that we're going to have? What do I not even have access to that if you catch me off guard, I might think I have access to that and tell you this is going to be easy. And then I sit down in my desk and it is in fact not easy,
Been there many times. I love saying, oh yeah, we can definitely do that. I hate finding out that we cannot definitely do that. Yeah. Or that's going to be a real pain.
It hurts.
Another piece of that you mentioned, like somebody says, I want to throw some time on your calendar. Sometimes people like to throw time on calendars because it's an easy thing to do. I don't necessarily like push back, but I do try and avoid grabbing just like people taking time for meetings that I don't think I have a purpose for. And so if I do have a purpose, like if somebody's like, I want to talk to you about such and such an analysis, there's a reason for me to be there. But occasionally somebody just drops something on my calendar about an analysis, but they haven't actually talked to me about it. So I just send them a message in Teams ahead of time, like, hey, like if it's just two of us, then I know I probably need to be there. But I say like, this is the first I've heard of this. Is there anything I need to do to prepare? Is there something I can prepare ahead of time? And a lot of times, usually it's like, no, somebody just mentioned this in the meeting and I just wanted to talk through it. Okay, no problem. But at least then I know that I'm not going to show up with bringing a knife to a gunfight. And so anyway, I think it's important to be proactive on those mystery meetings. And then also like I have a standing meeting on Wednesday afternoons with a couple guys I work with. And when we meet, it's productive. But when we don't have anything to talk about, I just message ahead of time. It's like, I don't have any updates this week. Do you have any updates this week? We're working on this request for you that will be done by X date that you wanted, but no updates right now. Do we need to meet? Nah, and we cancel. No big deal. So I love protecting my calendar.
I was just going to use the word protect. Yeah, you have to protect your calendar because the time will just go. And then people are like, why haven't you delivered? And you're like, I don't know. I've been talking to Bob. Like,
yeah. Well, and like, have you heard of the creator manager scheduling?
No.
Okay. So like, I think it was a book or something like that. I'll have to look it up, but essentially you have two different types of schedules. You have managers. Managers are going to meetings, making plans, giving instructions, etc. And so they can have back-to-back meetings because that's where they deliver value, is by managing a process and seeing something move forward. Creators need to have large chunks of focus time, 4 hours in a row, 3 hours in a row. And so when somebody wants to schedule something with me, I try to block my meetings together because I need to have time. Because if I have 30 minutes between a meeting, I'm not going to get anything done. I know I'm not because it's just task switching. It's just cognitively burdensome. And so I know I'm not going to get a lot done. So anyway, creators versus manager schedules, I think it's really helpful to keep in mind.
Yep. No, and this has been awesome. I've also seen some great questions. So do you mind if we hop over to Q&A?
Party on.
Party on. Okay, so first question. This is from Justino. What tools has your manager provided to ensure your success? How much is Excel still used in 2025? Okay,
let's see here. What tools have they provided and how much is Excel? Okay, Excel is still used. Mm-hmm. Like Excel is all over the place. I used Excel this morning. Yeah. It's really like, I don't use Excel most days personally, but it's still used all the time. When I was 100% analytics versus now I do a lot more model building and things like that. Oh, hold on. Just gonna, here we go. I have a tab that was giving me issues. Okay. So when I worked in analytics and I worked in SQL like all the time versus now I use a lot more Python and stuff like that, I used Excel heavily every day for all sorts of things. Use Excel. Pivot tables, the best. And then the other question, what tools has my manager provided to ensure my success? Tools my manager has provided. Well, let's see here. My manager is a big fan of using LLMs, and I appreciate that because nobody cares if I wrote the code or if Databricks Assistant wrote the code. They care if it works and if it gets done on time. And so he uses it a ton and encourages us to do the same, and I love it. Another tool is PTO. My manager takes leave. He's not like always there. And I appreciate that because then I don't feel guilty taking leave and having a good work-life balance. I know that's not the tool that the person's probably asking about, but it is really important. My last 2 managers have been great at taking leave, and I really appreciate it. I'm trying to think if there's any. Oh, and then another thing is we do every other week, we have like a live one-on-one, but in the weeks in between, we do async updates. And I usually make that in the form of a video because then I can share my screen like behind me and point to things and stuff like that, which is really nice because I don't really need a synchronous one-on-one every week most of the time, but it is helpful to like think through things and send something off at a time that works well for me and he can review it at a time that works well for him. So yeah.
And what tool do you use for your screen capture?
I use Microsoft Stream. It's just part of Microsoft 365, but you could use Snagit or whatever. There are lots of different tools out there that are available. One other tool that I want to call out. Oh, did I just forget what it was? Yeah, it'll come back to me. Anyway, good managers are great. I'm a big fan of mine.
They are. Okay, so this one is from Keisha. How do you manage to understand KPIs from a company from when you're working for a company where the industry is new to you?
Yeah, so a lot of KPIs are similar across companies, right? Like the cost to acquire a customer is going to be really similar. It's just, we ran ads on Google or whatever, and how much did it cost us before they signed up with us or before they filled out a form or before they bought the product or whatever. So a lot of KPIs are going to be really similar unless you're working in a part of the company that is really, really niche. Like I don't work in analytics for a specific power plant. But if I did, then I would need to understand the metrics associated with like production and very electricity specific metrics. But where I work right now, or where I have worked in the company, it's been like products per customer or consumption. And even though like I'm not like formally trained in electricity stuff, I get the idea of the rate of consumption per month and the amount that somebody pays for things. So to answer the question, ask lots of questions if you don't understand. One thing a past manager said was, the 3 things I want you to accomplish in your first 90 days on this job. 1, I want you to know where to find the data. 2, I want you to meet lots of people. And 3, I want you to understand what levers we can pull to affect our KPIs. So like, for example, if we're talking about our cost per lead, if our cost per lead is too high, what can we do to make it go down? And what is the effect of that? Well, we could just run fewer ads in such and such a channel. Okay, well, what is the effect of that? Well, we'll have fewer leads that come in. Okay, so what's the effect on the bottom line? And so learning not just like what the KPI means, but how to impact it and how it impacts things downstream from it is what I think actually makes someone really valuable, because you're seeing this bigger picture beyond like this number on the dashboard.
Mm-hmm. And some of those KPIs, just to talk about KPIs, you may have the same KPI, but let's say you're working on subscription data. Like if you're focusing on subscription data versus you're selling a physical product, right? For subscription data, churn is now like much easier to define. Somebody stops their monthly subscription, they have now left. If you're dealing with churn for a product that, maybe people only come back and buy every 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Now, how do you determine, because they're still going to care. They still want a retention model. They still want to understand who's leaving and who's who's staying, but the KPIs are going to be the same. The definition is going to be different everywhere, depending on the type of data that you're working with and what the business looks like.
Yeah.
All right. We have another question. As someone who works for an energy company that also deals with renewable energy, what would you say can be a standout aspect in a portfolio to mention on their resume?
Well, yeah, so I like to think of my resume or the different projects that I work on as whether or not they will go on my greatest hits list.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not hitting a greatest hit maybe every year or so, then I'm feeling like I'm not progressing or learning enough. So I think if you want to do something, like if you're very specifically oriented towards renewable energy and you know you want to stay in renewable energy, then, I mean, any project that's going beyond like just summarizing data, but like I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. I'll start broader. For me, if somebody were to apply for a job and show me a project that they had done that they enjoyed, whether it was renewable energy or not, but that they got into it and they worked hard and came up and made something cool or came up with something cool from it, I don't care if it's renewable energy or not. It's showing I needed to do some work and I did some work, and look, it's great work and I know how to present it. I know how to talk about it well. And that's enough. Like, I had never done any energy related projects. You can go look at my GitHub. I'm proud of my GitHub because I have my projects there and I put a README file that's a write-up of the project, not just the technical stuff, but the actual like bottom line, the point of the project. And then when I put those different things in my resume, whether it's from my GitHub or like that routing tool that I talked about earlier, I put that on my resume. Nobody in my previous jobs has said, well, that sounds like a cool project, but it's not energy related, so we don't want to talk to you. Instead, they're like, we want to talk to you. We're having this interview. Why don't you tell me about that project that you worked on? And I tell them about it. And even though it's not explicitly energy focused, apparently it was good enough to get me in the door, to get me an interview. And now I'm in my job that I have. So personally, I don't stress too much about the exact industry unless you know like there's something really specific you want to do in that industry, in which case I think you'd probably have to really dig around to find a really specific data set, or, you know, combine publicly available data, which is a fun challenge to try and do.
I love the point you made about the resume, because I want to make it clear too, like, even if I'm happy at my job, if I'm working on something cool, I am going to stop and take the time to go and update my resume in real time, because if you try and do it 2 years later, you're going to probably forget key details, or you won't remember how, because the thing that might, like, even if it's not a machine learning project, even if you built a dashboard and it actually gets adopted by the business and there is an insight there that somebody was able to use to make a decision, you want to capture that. And then what did that decision lead to? Was there, you know, and I hate how we always use like sales numbers, right? Because sometimes it's more squishy than that. Sometimes we're saving man hours. Sometimes we're, you know, making decisions that are important to the business, that are like more strategic. But if it's informing that decision, that's, you know, right? Your bullets on your resume start with a verb, end with a result. And even if the result isn't sales, you still have a result. And if it's a beautiful dashboard that you made that actually gets adopted by the business, and there was an insight there that like you can talk about too, that sounds interesting, like that's it. Like, stop and add that. Don't wait.
Yep.
All right. This one is from Catherine. How much time do you invest in yourself in terms of learning new things and ways to improve your own skill set?
I love this question.
Yeah.
So I learn a lot on the job, like while working, which is great because I find myself in using lots of different data or trying to answer different questions and things that are challenging. Like just recently, I had this idea that I could potentially build what's called a two-step model for some predictions that we were making. And a two-step model, essentially just you have a continuous output that you need to predict, but you have lots and lots of zeros. And so you make a first step model, which just predicts, are you a zero or are you not a zero? And then you take those not zeros, run them through a second model that predicts, well, if you're not a zero, then what are you? And so I had read about this and I knew I wanted to do something with it, but I hadn't really had the right opportunity come along. And then this came along. And so I was excited to take some time and build it out. I talked with my manager to say, this could make this system a lot better. Turns out in this particular case, it ended up being about the same performance. And so I didn't end up deploying it to production, but it was really interesting and engaging to spend some time thinking through the process and building that. And those thoughtful patterns and practices are useful, even if that didn't end up going into production. So I get to learn on the job. And then outside of my work, I used to spend a lot more time learning stuff explicitly. Now I do a lot of stuff in my community. I do a lot of community volunteer work with our local observatory. So I spend a lot of time nerding out about black holes and galaxies and star formation and stuff like that. So that's improving myself, but it's not really my work skill set. But I also absolutely love making side projects. Oh my gosh, I love side projects with whatever. And now that LLMs are everywhere, my ability to make side projects is supercharged because I can make them in languages that I don't know. So web app, no problem. We can do JavaScript. If you haven't tried it, do it. Go make a little Chrome extension or something or a little web page where you put in your birthday and it tells you something simple what your astrological sign is or something like that. Just go make something because it's so fun to make stuff, even if it's not totally applicable to your everyday work. You may find that you like or that you dislike things that you're working on.
That's actually super inspiring because if somebody asks me for a web app, it's either going to be in Shiny or Gradio, and I have never considered venturing out of my comfort bubble. And so maybe I'll take that to heart. So I think we only have time for one more question, and then I'm going to do the wrap up. But this one felt very related to the theme of the show. So successfully tackling a data analysis problem can involve getting data across various business units within the org. What suggestions can you offer to deal with trying to get data from units that, for various reasons, simply do not want to share such data?
Well, that is a real political conundrum, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so the way that I would approach that, I have not directly encountered this, but I know that it has existed near my orbit. So for me, the best thing that I would do to approach it is to say, all right, I'm going to use what I've got. I'm going to show what's missing. If I could fill in this blank, then we would know this bottom line impact. For whatever reason, I cannot get this, let's just say sales data. Sorry, sales. For whatever reason, we can't get this sales number data. And that's keeping us from knowing whether or not we are going to hit some revenue goal or something like that. I can't imagine somebody who would set a revenue goal where you couldn't get data to say if you had, because sales teams love numbers. So that's probably not going to happen. But the point is, if you can say, if I have that data, we can answer this business question and we can make big changes or we can use that to make more money or drive shareholder value or whatever, then that's going to go up the chain as far as it needs to go to grease the skids and get you the data that you need. Or you're going to find out that it's not a compelling business case and you're not going to have to do the project. The end.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love that. And also, so similarly, I haven't had the experience where somebody won't give me the data that I want, or, when I'm working sort of locally with people at a higher level, sure, there's times where we want data that we won't get, but it's not really sort of on me. It's not my responsibility. But I do have experience where I need data. I need to get it from another team because the systems don't speak to each other. And I have difficulty getting prioritized with them, right? Because my ask for data is not necessarily like their priority. And I think in that case, really what you're looking to do, it's just like when we talk about asking questions, it's being comfortable escalating things early and often, because if you sit on that for a week, somebody's going to say, why did you sit on that for a week? Like, just let me know. It's not really your responsibility to, yes, we have to manage stakeholder relationships and we need to be able to work within there, but also like this person has a different boss. We don't know what the relative priorities are, but that's, you were speaking about the boss's responsibilities earlier, and they are the person who takes that up and says, okay, I'm going to go and maybe I'll talk with that, the meeting of the bosses or whatever, and they work it out.
Yeah. And I think like to that point, I've definitely attended prioritization meetings for other teams so that I can, plead my case or whatever. And if my case is not like that compelling compared to the other things, well, that's why I'm not top priority, because there are other things that are a higher priority. I know it's not a matter of us not understanding each other. It's a matter of what is best for the business. And like, I think like we've talked about before, like the only walls that exist are the walls in your mind. And so like, there's nothing wrong with going to a different prioritization team meeting or sending someone a message in Slack and asking and trying to communicate that and clarify just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Because like we said, everyone's in a hurry, everyone's busy. Just put yourself out there. No one's going to think you're stupid. And hey, you might just get the job done.
I've had that experience too, where I think that what I'm working on is the most pressing thing that has ever hit the company. And then I show up to a meeting and, just the scope of other projects just thwarts what I'm working on. Absolutely. Okay, awesome. So I think that is all of the time that we have. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed this episode, and thank you, Eric, for sharing your time with us. If people want to be able to find and follow you online, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn.
That's what I say as well.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And thank you again, Eric.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.